Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Not that long ago I was following a post on one of the Facebook groups that I'm part of for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons where somebody had posted a question about layer actions. They weren't quite sure how they worked. They were kind of confused by the wording of it, and they weren't sure how to run that as well as the monster. So I want to go a little bit into kind of explaining how layer actions work in 5th edition, where it is something that seems to be relatively new to this version of the game, as well as some tips that I want to start integrating into my own gaming sessions when it comes to layer actions. So the first thing that I kind of want to do is go into the monster manual and show an example of layer actions. Right near the beginning there is a definition, so let's just see if we can find that there. Okay, so we've got legendary creatures. So legendary creatures layer. If a legendary creature has layer actions, it can use them to harness the ambient magic in its lair. On initiative count 20, losing all initiative ties, the creature can use one of its layers, one of its layer actions, or forego using any of them for that round. So again, this caused a little bit of confusion because the person in question wasn't sure if it meant that the creature would always go on initiative count 20 in their layers, or if they could only use the layer actions if they scored a natural 20. So what I want to do first is kind of explain, what a layer action is, just in case there's anyone else out there that is a little uncertain as to what it is and how it works, and then I'll go over some ideas that I had on how to make sure that they're used properly in your game. So first of all, a layer action is something completely independently separate from the monster itself. So you can use a layer action when the initiative count reaches 20 on any given round, as long as the creature whose layer it is still alive. The creature rolls initiative separately, so they would still go on their own separate initiative count, but when initiative reaches 20, then that's when the layer action kicks in. The best way to look at it is if you had an example with a player character, say, going on a 22, then the next player going on an 18, and then the creature who has layer, say, going on a 17. So when you get to initiative, the creature or the character on initiative 22 would go first. So they complete their action. Now before you get to the next player character who goes on initiative of 18, you would pass from 22 to 18, which means that an initiative count 20 would come up. At that point you choose one of the layer actions. Layer actions, there's usually a list that you can choose from. Typically it gives you 3 options, sometimes it's less, but it usually gives you 3 options. You have to use each of the options before you can reuse any that you've previously used. And you can't use the same action twice. So I'll go into a little bit more about that in a little bit here. So that's kind of the basic explanation as to how it would work. And then after you have your character go on 18, then the monster whose layer it is can go on their initiative of 17. Let's just say that one of your characters goes on initiative 20, like the one that goes first got a 20 for their initiative, and the layer would go on 20. You would still have the player character act first because the layer technically loses any ties. So if a player character, or even if one of the monsters that are in the encounter gets a 20 for initiative, they would activate before the layer action itself. So after I kind of explained that, I came to the realization that I typically forget to use layer actions. It's not something that I do intentionally. There are times that I have. For example, if anybody watched the live stream D&D adventure that I ran, the battle with the White Dragon, it was actually written into the adventure, and if anybody wants to actually read the adventure, it is available on my Facebook page for reading as in the form of a note. But when I was writing the adventure, the White Dragon was designed to not take advantage of their layer actions until they reach a certain hit point threshold. I think it was around 50 hit points or something like that, or 30 or 20. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. The issue is that by the time they reached that threshold, the player characters just did massive amounts of damage and never got to use one. But looking back, there were other encounters where I definitely meant to use layer actions, and it just completely slipped my mind. So I wanted to find a better way of knowing when the layer action would take place, and ensuring that I don't forget to actually use it. So using kind of some earlier examples, what I've got down here, just a second here. So what I've got here is sort of a mock-up of how I track initiative normally when I'm running a D&D game. So up top I have a set of a row of, this would normally be on loose leaf, but I have, the first few lines dedicated specifically to the player characters. So what I would have is, now in this case I have fighter, cleric, rogue, and wizard, but normally I would have the player character's name written down. Then I got the line here, just kind of separate the names from the initiatives, and I just kind of track the initiatives this way. When the combat's over, I would just scratch it out, and then write the next set of numbers for the next encounter, and so on. For the monster, I do keep track of not only the initiative, but the hit points. And typically with the monsters, I would only be using the initiative once anyway, so I don't feel the need to have it as sort of like a dedicated initiative column. So right now, the example that I want to use is with a Beholder Death Tyrant, which is an undead Beholder. Beholders are one of my favorite monsters, and it's one that just so happens to have Lair actions. Now as you can see here, I've already got initiatives determined, and I did use the numbers in my previous example from what I have here on this list. So for example, the player playing the rogue got a 22, the fighter got an 18, the beholder itself goes on a 17, the wizard goes on a 16, and the cleric goes on a 6. Now this is what I would typically have done in the past when it comes to tracking initiative, but this monster has a lair action because they're encountering it in its lair. So what I'd like to do is, above the beholder itself, is just write down basically the word lair or lair action, and then just have the same line that I do to separate the words from the initiative, and then simply just write in 20. That way I know for sure what order things are going to take place in. So I would have the rogue go first, followed by the beholder's lair action, followed by the fighter, and then finally the beholder itself. So that's so I know to make sure that I use lair actions, and like I said, this is something I'm going to start using going forward, because I've definitely forgotten a fair number of times in the past to use those actions. As far as the second part of lair actions, where you have to exhaust the entire list of possibilities before you can reuse any of them, and you can't use the same one twice. So what I would suggest, or what I'm going to do, is write down on some cue cards each of the possibilities. So for the Beholder Death Tyrant, I have its lair actions here. Now again, I don't normally do these in marker or write that big. I would typically have them probably just written in pencil, but I wanted to show up for the video. So the first lair action is an area 50-foot cube, fills with spectral eyes and tentacles. It's considered to be lightly obscured and difficult terrain until the next initiative 20. So you can write out the full description of what the ability is if you want, or if you have a shorthand, you could certainly do that as well. Unfortunately, they don't have names, but I think it's also good to have kind of a description of what they do, mechanically speaking, so that you don't always have to have the monster manual necessarily open at the time that you come up to the lair action. So I've got that one. And then the another action here is wall sprout spectral appendages. Any creature hostile to beholder starts within 10 feet of wall, must make a dex save DC 17 or be grappled. To escape, athletics or acrobatics check DC 17. So it's a little bit of an example of just some shorthand. Cut out just a few of the words just so I know the base mechanics. So that's that one, and then the last one is just Spectral Eye within 50 feet of Beholder, fires random eye ray. So what I would do is just have all three of these laid out so that I can kind of see them here. It's hard to get them all in camera at the same time, but we'll just kind of do it a second here. Making this more complicated than it needs to be. Normally you'd have a lot more room, but it's hard to do it when you're working with the limited view of a camera. So I've got the three different options here. So let's just say we reach our first initiative count 20. Player characters are pretty close to the walls. So I would say, what I would do is have the wall sprout and spectral appendages. I would go through everything that happens. This lasts until next initiative 20 as well. I just didn't write that down because I know that that's the way it works. So after everybody would make their DC 17 dex save, I know that this one would be used. So I would set this one aside while I'm resolving its actions, And once its actions have been fully resolved, I would then flip it over to know that it has been used. The next round comes, let's just say I decide to use the 50-foot cube filled with spectral eyes and tentacles to make it difficult for them to reach the beholder. I would do that, and once I know that its actions have been used up, I would again flip it over so I know it's been used, and then on the third and final round, I would know that the spectral eye within 50 feet is the one I would have to use. Now, if I chose to use a layer action to begin with. So once all three of them are used, what I would do is flip them all back over, but I would make sure to kind of still set this one so that I know that this is the last one that I use, because now that I've refreshed the list, I wouldn't be able to use the Spectral Eye 2 rounds in a row. So I would have to choose one of these two first before I can use the Spectral Eye again. And you can use them in any order. You don't have to go down the list in the order that they appear in the monster manual. You just simply have to make sure that you don't use the same one twice and that you use them all. So those are just kind of some steps that I think I'm going to start taking to make it a little bit easier for myself, so that I don't forget to use these actions. And if anybody was sort of confused by layer actions, or if other people have had the issues of forgetting them like myself, hopefully you found this video helpful and useful, because like I said, it was just an idea that kind of came to me that I thought would make it a lot easier to remember and actually use the actions, as opposed to constantly forgetting them just because I'm so caught up in just going through the actions of the monsters and the player characters that I oftentimes will forget that it has layer actions until the combat is basically either over or the monster in question's only got a few hit points left, so there's really not much point in using them anyway. So again, I just want to do that quick video on layer actions, and again, I hope it was helpful for anyone like myself that was having difficulties with remembering them. And I hope the explanation helped for anyone that was having difficulties comprehending or understanding the exact wording of how they have layer actions set up in the 5th edition monster manual, because it's not as well explained, I don't think, as it necessarily could be. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it helpful. And you know, if you did, just let me know in the comments below, because I always like to know if these things actually help anyone or not. And we'll see you next time.